All right, Brad, I see you want to talk a little bit about VVR, or Veritas Volume Replicator, right?
Absolutely.
Can you explain a little bit about how it works?
Yep.
All right.
So Volume Replicator is one of our key products from a disaster recovery perspective. So for a customer, that means they're going to have their production site and typically a DR site. We refer to the production site as the primary site. The DR site would be referred to as the secondary site. Right? Now, if you think about an application that's got a disk group, right, and inside that disk group they've got some number of volumes that are critical to that application. Okay. Let's say they have 3 volumes. Well, not necessarily all those volumes are critical that they get out to the DR site. For example, they might have a volume, that in this case I call volume 3, that maybe has temporary stuff in it. So perhaps it's stuff that the application automatically generates every time it comes up, or maybe it's something like a temporary file system or temp table space in a database. So what they would do is they would identify all of the key volumes that need to be replicated to the DR site. The structure they have here is also going to be the structure they have on the DR site. The key part of that, again, is that only the critical stuff is going to get replicated. Now, these 2 sites, of course, are going to be connected through a wide area network, because for this to be true DR, this needs to be thousands of miles or kilometers apart. Okay? So what happens when they do application writes, they're going to write to volume managers just like normal. Well, what happens with Volume Replicator is that VVR is part of Volume Manager. So when the application writes come in, VVR actually intercepts those writes and basically sends them to VVR on the other side, as well as responsible for writing them to the local volumes. When this gets sent to the other side, there's 2 typical ways that's done. Synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous says that when a write comes in, it has to be written to the other side and to the local volume before we can return back to the calling application. Usually that's a very limited distance that can have because of the latency involved. So most customers don't end up doing synchronous with VVR. Typically they do async. Async says we can queue those writes up as long as we have a way that VVR does to queue them up locally, and then as allowed we get them to the other side. Okay? So the whole idea of this is get the critical data to the DR site so that if a disaster happens and the production site goes down, someone at the DR site can first make the call and ensure that this really truly was a disaster versus, for example, the network going down, and then have the application come up on the other side.
All right. So what I want to make sure about here too is that when we send the writes over here, we send them in the order that they were actually written, right?
Absolutely. That's called write order fidelity. And
Exactly.
that's very critical to the application.
Exactly, and that's something that's very, very key. Customers want to make sure that the data is not out of sync, if you will, that it's not been sent over in different blocks, if you will,
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for explaining to us a little bit about how VVR actually does the basics of protecting.